aligning to a shared single agreed path forward. And I think that's a component. We might have reached that though, we might be there. I think today's call will be telling, we'll understand better. And then I also think that, I guess the feeling that I have is that there's like the loose tie of the cultural, the TC transformation proposal that was passed, and I'd like us to conclude it somehow by informing the community of something, whether we're going to replace it with something else, whether we're going to just, we're not executing it. So I feel like it's our responsibility to say why we're not going to execute it. Because it's passed, so in theory, the expectation was it would have been executed by now, and we agreed not like to hold on and wait and analyze other possibilities. And now I think I would say, and maybe that's just my responsibility to do, to write something that says, here's why we're going to put it on hold. But I guess I'd like to make sure that the message that I would write we all agree with. So yeah, I guess that's I would say my intention here today. And I'll pass to you, Bear, since I know you know the question since you were here.
Thank you, Tam. Yeah, I don't know. I'm really, right now, I feel like I'm just really, really trying to be open to whatever happens and whatever shape this transformation takes. I think it's important to prioritize that we all feel good with whatever decision we make. So trying to get that consensus as best as we can. I think that's important, and to be transparent, to be clear, to really try to look to put the thesis mission as a priority. I think that can help us simplify things and try not to fall into just a loophole of ideas and planning with no ending, and try to keep the efforts happening already, and all the momentum that has been generated lately, to continue that and push it forward. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. I'll pass it to Nate, that I think he also knows the question.
Yeah, I think, the process has been really good, in my opinion, in terms of getting a lot of input from different people. I think it's good to see that a lot of people care about the direction of where we're going. I think we do have a little bit of scope creep in terms of what we're trying to resolve at this moment in time, and so I think channeling that and understanding what this proposal is and is not is something really important to define at this moment. So because other things will form and will be better understood as time moves on. But I do think that let's solve this small issue right now and move forward. But yeah, overall, I think the process has been good. And I'll pass it over to Lily.
Thanks, Nate. I'm actually very excited. I think we created so much momentum this last few days, and people are participating in the proposals. I think there was some autonomy built too. Last week, there was Rex that proposed something, and Nate, and I, and Gideon, and people felt like curious and involved in asking questions. And Juanca also wanted to propose something. He couldn't. He just told me. But I think it created some good momentum. And I think the most important is that we are following our governance process, that until we change it is the one we have. And we're exercising and seeing what are the places that need to be looked at. And yeah, I think it could be a little bit more dynamic, perhaps. Like, I think we can like continuously make decisions one after the other to move on with this process and get something in place and understand that this is a transition proposal and it's okay to be a transition proposal. But then when we settle on that, we can build on something else. And then from there we go. Yeah, I'm really happy with how everyone is engaged and how we're doing this. And now pass, I guess everybody has been getting, and Griff, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I think the transition's going pretty well. I think it's going a little slow, I guess. And I feel like, yeah, when I participate in some of these calls, I don't have all the context. And so then I'm definitely responsible for some of the scope creep and some of the, like, off tangent because I just, I'm just popping in and then I don't fully understand the progress. But I think that we can speed these things up and try to like not push them through, but I feel like it can go a little bit faster. That's my main thing, because I think everyone's aligned on a lot of things, and if we can just like focus on those, then we can get those things done, and then where there's issues or more complexity, then we address those one at a time, and maybe those things take more time. But yeah, I think it's going pretty well. These twice a week calls are very helpful. And I just have to say, like, I actually need to pack. I'm taking a trip to Toronto, so I'll be mostly listening during this call and not actively participating, but listening. I'll throw it to Gideon. Are you hosting this one?
Yeah, thanks, Griff. Lots of packing these days, packing and unpacking. Okay, well, I'll give you my take on it. I almost feel like just saying ditto to what Bear said. Yeah, I feel like this has been an exercise for me of learning to let go and just trust that the community knows what's best, and so it's this delicate balance. I was talking to Griff about this yesterday. Delicate balance of like, how do you just let go and know that the community will do its job and step forward and do this work, and then also play a role of kind of like a catalyst to try to like move things along. So it's I've been in a lot of organizations, and this is definitely the most challenging one I've run across in terms of like figuring out how things how things move. But I think that we're getting there, and I think that what we're ending up with is going to be a better solution. So that's the key thing, and I'm really looking forward to like actually moving forward and starting to do the actual work. So I think that's exciting. Okay, so one just quick question before this is tangential, but I noticed that there's a lot of kind of like very detailed stuff that's going into the Stewards channel right now. Rex he's on fire, man. It's just like totally cranking on many fronts right now. And so the question is, does that progress, does that conversation belong in the Stewards channel, or is that clogging things up? And if so, should we put it someplace else? And welcome, Maxwell and Blid1. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah. So that's the question. Hi, Blid1. Do you think you could turn off your mic? Thank you.
Can I jump in and answer that question first?
Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
I actually really enjoy all of the updates in the Stewards channel. I don't know that it needs to be the Stewards channel. It can be any channel, but I think it actually shows the momentum and excites rather than is like, I don't look at it as noise at all. I look at it as like, oh, this is great. There's really a lot of momentum. So I would say we keep it there. Yeah.
Second
I don't know
that.
if anyone has another opinion.
No, I think it doesn't really matter to me, but I think it's really good to whatever works for people, and this seems to be working. So keep it up, yeah. I think we're going to change the Discord anyway at some point, and so I think it's it's kind of it is what it is, and as long as people are engaged, I'm good with it.
Okay, any other perspectives before we move on? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Welcome, Mitch. So the next thing that we wanted to do is I just wanted to just first, before we go any further, Rex did kind of an interesting graphic yesterday on like the state of the fork, like just to kind of like portray like how many forks are there of these proposals right now. And I think what he showed was that there are really two at this point, two active ones. There's Livia's fork and there's my fork of my original one. So that's my first question before we go any further. Is that a correct understanding? Are there other ones that are out there that are still active? Okay, sounds like not. I ended up taking just a little bit of background on that. I ended up taking a number of Rex's comments and put that into my revised fork. And then Nate ended up doing a lot of detailed work on kind of like compensation. And so that I think is that's something that he agreed would be something that we would come back to later as some kind of like a follow-up set of work that we need to do around that. Whatever the proposal is that we go forward with, that he agreed that would be something he would defer on. So is that a fair statement, Nate?
Yep, it is for sure.
Okay. So as the next step, what Livia has agreed to walk us through her fork of the proposal and then take questions on it. Livia?
Thank you. I'll share my screen. Yeah, so I didn't have many changes. The changes are in red, and I deleted a few things that I thought were extra, but I actually didn't mark up what were the things I deleted, and then after I thought that was stupid, but well, this is what we have now. I think they didn't make it. I just felt like deleting them would make it more concise, but the bulk of the proposal didn't change because of them. So I think the main change is that the TEC has been focusing so much in inward operations for like most of our life. And I think it's the time to shift to a more out-facing operations. So for our operations to support our mission, to support token engineering, and not for our operation to kind of feed itself internally and isolate us a little bit more. So yeah, I just added a few things to how we could be more out-facing to the token engineering field. And this means, well, here in the team, something I changed is that in Gideon's proposal, he was mentioning to have the roles being very loosely defined, like for the people not to be directly attached to the roles. But I think it would be important to have an exercise for people to express what is their expertise, what is their availability, what are their skills preferences, and then have like even loosely defined, but have each person having their own role to ease coordination. And then I'll talk more about in the end of this document, but I have an exercise to propose for that. And also I added the role of a token engineering needs research here. So having someone like part of this role to be part part of our operations should have someone always looking to what the token engineering space needs, what are the projects that are popping up, who can we make connections with, how to strengthen our partner relations, what are some needs that could be drawn to our governance process, how can we promote something that is happening in token engineering with our comms. So having someone like actively looking to that. And how is this relevant to the TEC mission? I think, just what I just said, improve the TEC's ability to be out-facing the token engineering community, engage with projects, professionals, interested people to bring visibility to the token engineering discipline and ease coordination between peers and elucidate the access to the TEC's grant process. The team is still, I put here undefined because I'm talking to every person individually, and there are people that I still couldn't have a hold on. But Auntie has agreed to be a part of this team. Bear as well, Rex, Gideon, and I'll have a talk to Nate after this call, also Acid Laser. And I asked Angela if she had a suggestion of someone that could join from Token Engineering Academy side, but also Auntie has been involved in the Token Engineering Academy, and hopefully he could take some of these functions. And then the team process and culture. The change would just like make it more explicit, the accountability, like the community accountability. So having a feedback type form available at the end of every month for the community to provide constructive criticisms, suggestions, and acknowledgements to the core team. That, of course, should be integrated by them, almost like an advice process, but something that happens like ritualistic in the end of every month. And then people have a sense of like communication, and it's not so enclosed. And also what I wanted to propose so this exercise we did on Figma the other day showed a lot of points that were still unclear. And I think it would be very hard to put them in this proposal because it's almost like a research period that we would have to go to each one of them and build like a roadmap or something to address most of these changes. So again, like understanding the transition character of this proposal. And then I didn't put myself in the team because I'm not in the team, but I would like to commit to creating a session. The first thing after this proposal passes, if it does, to set metrics and guidelines to be developed on the the priorities that were already identified by the community, including the priorities that are added in this proposal, like this connection with token engineering. So understanding how success and failure look like, but this very much based on how each person wants to contribute with what they are committing with. So defining a little bit the roles they want to energize, and also create accountability measures based on each contributor. So they say how they would like to be held accountable, and we can have rituals for this accountability. So how each person would like to be held accountable would be present in this feedback type form, for example. So here I just added very minor things that people would be compensated through praise. I removed the bounty from Gideon's proposal because I don't think bounties work. I think the experiences we had with them was that they were bad for our culture and they created conflict. And I think we either have volunteers that are rewarded by praise and the core contributors, or people that submit proposals to the common pool. I think this was mostly it.
Okay, thanks, Livia. I think this is great. But let me turn it over to people for comments and questions.
Maybe a comment. This is something that Tam mentioned yesterday, I think, and this is also something that I've been thinking a lot about. That I think it might be a minor thing, but I think it's important, and it has to do with the vocabulary that we use. I don't know, for some reason, this idea of core team, the word core and the word operations, for me personally, it didn't have a really negative meaning before, but now thinking more about it and trying to align it with what we're trying to do of doing things differently than they have been done before. I think it's important that, and repeating what Tam said, that we start building or using a new and different vocabulary. And I think if we're gonna use this, like we're gonna take this team or this new organizational design, I think it's important to take into account that. So, for example, personally, I really like this idea of coordination team, right? I think it really shows what this team should do and won't operate the whole DAO. I don't think that's the idea, but it will help coordinate the efforts across the DAO. Yeah, would be one comment there.
I like that. I'll change it. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I think operations is one of the responsibilities of the coordination team, but coordination seems to better embody what this has evolved into. It's a lot more than just operations. And then my only other comment was going to be, I agree with maybe the removing of the word bounty. I think bounty has lots of different connotations, means lots of different things, and maybe could be misconstrued. I think we already have, the intent behind it is like, hey, if we have some stuff that needs to get done that's outside of those coordination team responsibilities, then let's make a proposal and pass it and get someone to do it. I think that meets that goal or requirement for that. So I'm on board with removing kind of the terminology around bounties.
Thank you. Is there anything that somebody disagrees with?
Can I just ask, I know that we're setting an hourly rate. Is the expectation that hours will be measured, calculated and submitted at the end of the month, or is the expectation that'll be, this is a 20-hour per week role, or position, or whatever we want to call it, or this work stream will be 20 hours a week, or how granular is the expectation?
Yeah, I was thinking for the role exercise. Actually, I felt inspired to think of that exercise we did in the comment stack with Kate once, that we were looking into like, what are the roles we want to energize, and then people understanding what they can commit with. And I think we could have like a loose time estimate of that, but I don't like to be based on time, but on deliverables and on like what people are committing with. So I think that the DAI per hour maybe is just, we don't have a better measure for that, but probably we could set a somehow fixed frame for each contributor.
Yeah, that was a question of mine too. And actually, maybe a clarification question on the budget, and maybe I just didn't do the math right because I was just doing it in my head. but that budget seems to account for slightly higher than the kind of stated goal of 20-ish dollars an hour for 3 full-time roles split between 6 people was kind of the piece I saw, or 21. So the 168,000, sorry, 14,000 a month. I see the scrolling. I'm looking at numbers. Can't do math while I'm talking. That seemed to be slightly higher than that budget. So is there buffer in there for people to contribute more hours? Is that buffer there for I think where I was going to go and the question I was going to ask is like in relation to those things that are maybe outside the scope, or maybe they want, there's a skill that the core group doesn't have, but it's not like a full-on project proposal. Is there like buffer in there to go to ask a community member to say, hey, can you commit some time to this, and we'll put some of these funds towards it, or is this 14,000 is essentially we're gonna spend this for sure, split between these 6 people? Kind of what are the thoughts around that, or is that still to be determined? And then is there going to be kind of a specific period for this? Like, is this going to be, we're going to try it for 3 months, we're going to have it indefinitely until it doesn't work? Is there kind of an intention around that? Those, I think, are my 2 questions.
So
I'll pass. Go
I just
ahead.
want to say that I, compensation in this transition process determines structure. It just will. How we decide to organize the compensation scheme or model that we choose will determine how we structure roles, how we structure who's participating in what and how. And so I do think this is something that is very, very important to discuss, because I think it influences everything that we're doing after.
Yeah, I'll pass to Gideon soon to talk more about this part of the budget, because that I didn't change much from the original. I mean, I didn't change at all from the original proposal. But on the question of how long are we doing this for, my understanding is that we're submitting this proposal to Snapshot, so it's not a financial proposal, because we'll be using the remaining funds of the working groups that are dissolving. So the time frame is like as long as the funds last, kind of thing. And I think this needs to be clear and more clear in the proposal. And then the point is that after this transition period and having like that exercise with the metrics and understanding a small roadmap for the transition, we'll know, like after this period, we'll probably have a whole new proposal, because there will be so many things defined in this transition process. It's just important that people are being compensated and that we have a minimal structure to move forward. So that's why this proposal is important. Gideon, do you want to explain a little bit more the numbers?
Yeah. And let me start by saying one other thing too. I think one of the things that I like about this proposal is it does a nice job of not overly dictating the way that this team will actually work. I think this is one of the challenges, with autonomy, like with autonomous teams and allowing like duocracy to actually work, is kind of defining some constraints maybe, or like a boundary conditions for the team to work within, and then allowing the team to have some flexibility in terms of how it actually executes against that. And I think that the way that Libby has framed this does a pretty nice job of that. So that's going to be one of the things I really want to pay attention to as we're thinking about this. So this is very relevant to the question of pay, and the that 168,000 DAI in the my original proposal, it says that this is still just like a working number. Like it still is going to need some work. I very much see this as a transition period too, and that actually was not clear enough in my original proposal. So the way that Libby described this, I think, is very accurate. We will do this with the funds that are left over from the working groups in order to just keep going and just make sure that things are working and that we can actually then solve some of these bigger questions that have been raised in the process. What that means is that I think we're going to experiment, at least in the original proposal, with like kind of the concept of a base pay. I think all of the team members from the conversations I've had, everybody accepts that, you know, this is not something that we're locking in. It's just so that we can get through this interim period and then use that period to define a better way of figuring out pay. I mean, I wish I could say right now that we have that figured out. We don't. You know, this has been an ongoing problem within the TEC, like how we do this the right way that's fair and yet accountable. So it's going to take a little bit of work to get it figured out. I mean, this is a problem across the whole DAO space. So that's my answer, is that Bear's been doing some exercises over the last couple of days and looking at like what's left from the existing multi-sigs and how long of a runway that gives us. But we didn't get too fancy in terms of like this role is worth this much, and I think that's something that we've got to work on in this interim period between this and when we run out of funds and we go for an actual proposal to conviction voting.
So do we have a rough estimate of how much funds we have? Because I'm just back of the napkin, 21 an hour times 40 hours a week times 13 weeks in a quarter, right? Is just under 11,000 per person or per full-time person. So that's 33,000 a quarter. That's under the 42, which I think is good. That would be under that. But do we have an idea what that funding bucket looks like roughly? Is it 50 grand? Is it 150 grand?
Yeah, I'm happy to share a working, like a spreadsheet that I was using to come up with that. But it's basically it amounts to 3 full-time equivalents, but it's spread across multiple people. Part of it is this idea of options, TEC options. So that explains about 12,000 of the difference. And then, so the total was like 120,000 a year, plus options at around 12,000, and then some extra money for tools and services that ended up being like 140,000. And I don't know what we'll have to go back I have to go back and look at the 168 because I've changed some of these numbers around. But I think the bigger, to get to your bigger question, Maxwell, is I think this is part of it too, right? It's like, are we saying that the only people who ever get paid anymore are this coordination team? I don't think that would actually work. So that's part of what we've got to figure out is like, what does that look like for compensating people who are not part of the coordinating team? Are we relying purely on praise to do that? And if so, what do we need to do with praise to reconfigure things the way that we use praise to make sure that is serving that role? Or, are we relying on proposals to do that? That might be a little bit clumsy. So that's, it might take a lot of work to pass proposals, as we've seen with conviction voting. So there's a question here that we don't have an answer to. And I think that's part of what Libby was getting at here, is that's some of the work that we need to define as part of this interim period.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I also kind of agree with Nate that getting that defined sooner rather than later, right? I don't know when we say this interim period, I don't know what that means, because getting that defined sooner rather than later is 100% going to impact what that interim period, who's involved in that, and what that looks like. So,
Yeah.
I think it definitely warrants more discussion, but we can't kind of put it too far down the roadmap, because it's going to impact it's going to be very impactful very quickly.
Yeah. So I'll tell you, I mean, this is getting a little bit ahead of things, but since this question has come up, a lot of this is going to depend on how much is in the pool that moves over into this team, right? So we know that there's 10,400 die from Sampo, and we know that there's about 9,200 die from Communitas. The big question, and there might be some coming over from Transparency, it just depends on what happens with a project that they have outstanding right now. And then there's 500 or 600 from Stewards. The big question is the marketing multi-sig, which has 18,000. So depending on what happens with that and whether some of that funding comes over to pay for Acid Laser's time and some of NT's time for doing the curation service, which is really just focused on communications now. Like, it's really focused on supporting Twitter. Depending on how much of that comes over, will determine how much runway we actually have. That's the funds available question. And then there's the question of how many hours per week. And what we've been working on right now is, because we haven't defined all of these roles, and we don't know who's going to be doing what, it's kind of a chicken or egg thing. So what we're working with is basically hourly wage of 21 per hour, and then weekly hours of 20. And so when you add that up, it ends up being about 10,000 die a month in this interim period. And so I think this is probably going too deep for this conversation right here, but if people are interested in this, we should definitely follow up. You can, I mean, I guess I don't want to go too far on this right now, because the focus right now is on Livy's proposal. So let's take it back to that and just know that there's been some thinking on this, and absolutely it's very clear that this is like one of the first things we got to figure out. Livy, I'm going to just turn it back over to you if you have other things you'd like to point out.
Yeah, so I just want to add one more thing to this, is that for the proposal itself, moving forward, perhaps we take out the annual budget and we just say, hey, this is what we're focusing on for payments for the transition process and period in this kind of interim team before we solidify, and then officially go with the budget proposal when, I don't know, whenever we decide to put another proposal up to the community. Or do we think we should keep it in this one?
I think we should run with this one until, I think definitely we should understand how much funds are available and how long it would take for us to spend them, and then understand what is the date exactly we need to be thinking about the next proposal to the common pool.
Can I ask,
But
what are we trying to accomplish with this proposal? Like, what is this defining for us? Like, what are we trying to accomplish with this one?
First, this is stating how our operations are changing from the old structure that we had. So we were transitioning from the stewards to what? Like, we didn't have that defined. So I think this proposal was defining that a little bit, and also defining the direction of what we're going to be focusing on. So what are the operations that are going to be covered? What is the intention of this operations, which is focusing in supporting token engineering field, and also setting up a roadmap for how things are going to be worked on. So that's what I'm proposing we do in this exercise right after this proposal passes. Like, what exactly this team is going to be doing? What are the operations that are going to be addressed? And how are we tackling the token engineering out-facing nature.
And so this will just result in a snapshot, right?
So let's talk about the process going forward. Livy and I talked yesterday about a way of. So before we do that, before we talk about process, are there any other questions or concerns about Livy's proposal? Okay. Okay, Livy, thank you for sharing that and for fielding the questions. So Livy and I talked yesterday about a possible process for bringing these things together. Livy, do you want to walk us through what we talked about yesterday?
Yeah, so like how, considering this is a transition, how we can move forward to something that is a little bit further than a transition and have things more established. So Gideon and I talked that we were waiting to see if there was any other proposal today, but if the final ones are just both of our proposals, we could probably merge them together because there is nothing conflicting from one another, and make one final proposal and then answer these questions. I think the budget question is the more urgent one for us to understand how long we would be in transition phase. And so, yeah, mapping all the concerns, integrating them on this final proposal, submitting it to Snapshot, and notify stakeholders that this proposal is happening, just so people understand. It's more of like a symbolic step, so people understand that, because most people don't even know that the stewards don't exist anymore, or where are we going, what is the transition. So it's important for everyone to be aware and have a voice to say, yes, I agree with this, or no, I don't. And if this passes, and then we have this first session to understand the commitments of each person that is in the team, what roles they're going to be fulfilling loosely, and then the next steps would be like, okay, what is the roadmap for things we need to achieve? And we have mapped them already in a previous session that we did that exercise of the priorities of the TEC. So we have not only priorities, but there was those things that were hearted, that were like second priorities. So there's definitely a lot of things in the pipeline that this team could be working on. So understanding how they will do that, and what is more or less the time frame, and then creating a cyclical governance process for that. So that's something that came from the insights of the decision-making exercise we did, the learnings from the stewards, that the thing that worked the most in terms of governance in the TEC was the collaborative economics process. So how can we bring some of the things that worked there to the structure that we have now? And that's basically education and ritual. So having like periodic moments where this team will be sharing with the community what are they thinking about those priority tasks, how are they tackling it, if the community has any feedback, and then introducing this space of like people jumping in to say, oh, I agree with this, I don't agree with this, but following mostly on advice process, in the sense that the team has the discernment to accept the feedback or not. We're not looking for consensus. We're just offering this spaces for integration. And yeah, this will happen along the transition time. So when this money is about to finish, that a proposal will need to be submitted to conviction voting for funding, we'll already have a much different understanding of what this team is doing. The community will be integrated in how to provide feedback. And if there's something that's not working, will be clear for everyone, and we can change that in the proposal to the common pool. So the main objective overall is to connect with the token engineering field, and those should be the metrics to manage the success of this team, how they're doing, and how others can integrate in the community. So hopefully by this time, we'll have much more people from the token engineering space participating in governance, just coming to share content, having their content promoted in our Twitter, having understanding their needs, having them submitting proposals, and so on.
And if I can I'm going to just piggyback on that as well. I think so. In the simplest terms, basically what we're saying is we're going to go through this process of merging these proposals. We'll put it up for the snapshot vote, and then based on how much runway we have, that defines. I'm just basically repeating this, but just shorter. That defines the runway, and at the end of that runway, we do a proposal for conviction voting to actually do ask for money to keep this going. And so what Livy is also pointing out is that there are a bunch of processes that we want to put in place for defining what this team is working on based on some of the things that have already been identified, and then a process for actually working with the community and basically reporting out and getting feedback on that. And I think the only reason I'm kind of saying something else here is that I think it's also important to understand, all of us understand and have patience, that this team is going to be working with much reduced capacity to what we're used to, right? It's a much smaller team. So that's going to be one of the challenges, is figuring out how much this team can actually bear during this period. And Livy, is there anything else you'd like to add on it?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that the most important thing is the feedback loop with the token engineering community. This should be the guiding focus of everything we're doing.
Absolutely, getting us more externally focused. I think we're all in 100%. Well, I'm hoping we're all in agreement on that. It's time to start facing outwards. So, in the last 8 minutes, I would just like to open it up for people to comment on, or ask questions about what we just proposed as the next steps.
Maybe I would say I would ask for dates, like how long would we take to first, I think, merge the two proposals into one, and when would we post it into Snapshot? When would we decide to how much money actually it's gonna be, depending on the different multisigs of the working group. So yeah, basically just like deadlines for every step.
Yeah, I think budget, from my understanding, is just talking to people, right, who are in this multi-sigs to make sure of the final amount we have. So that could be done. I'm hoping all of that could be solved tomorrow, that Gideon and I could meet tomorrow to merge those proposals with the team that is established. Also hope to still hear from Angela today on that front. But if not, I think we can move with the team we have and perhaps add a person in the near future, if that's if that makes sense. And then we could probably submit to Snapshot on Monday. I think that could look good.
Yeah, that sounds good.
And then what happens on Tuesday? Do we act as if this passed and move forward for a week, or what's the plan?
I have one perspective on that. Is I think that there's there's a bunch of work that's just happening anyways. So Rex, all the stuff you're doing, I mean, things have not stopped, right? So we have to just continue doing the work that needs to like, this shouldn't stop us from doing work, right? That we should be pretty clear about that. But I don't know, Livy, how long does the snapshot process take usually?
Did you ask something to me? Sorry, my connection broke.
Yeah, I was just asking, how long do we usually allocate for the snapshot voting process?
4 days.
Okay, are there any other questions or concerns about the process that has been suggested?
I added a question to the bottom of the agenda. If we have the last 5 minutes, maybe we could talk about that if there are no other questions.
Sure. So just we'll close this part out, and I just want to thank Livy for all of her work in pushing forward on this and making sure that we have good process, and for everybody, just all of the work that's gone into like providing feedback on this. I think we're going to end up with a better process, so and a better proposal. So, all right, we'll close it out. That's what we're going to do. So that feels good. That's good. Okay, Tam, do you want to take us through the last item?
Yeah, and just in our last few minutes, it's really about, Gardens has been testing osmotic funding on their, Blossom Labs has tested osmotic funding on Gardens. And Sem has asked about whether the TEC would be interested in starting to use it. And normally this is something that we would bring to the stewards. So it's more of a process question, and then we can find the answer. How should we address these kinds of questions now? Where should this come to? And then, yeah, that's it. Just short, like it would require, there's no cost to the TEC, but we would want to vote to upgrade our Gardens and then have a plan for how to use it. Piloting with the operations team could be interesting. And then, some suggested funding token engineering, like CAD groups or other token engineering groups could be an interesting way to use it as well. And I think people need to also understand what osmotic funding is, which is using superfluid to stream funding to a group. And so it's sort of like conviction voting, except rather than once it passes, you get a lump sum. Once it passes, a stream turns on. And we could share some more about that so that we can make a more informed decision. But process-wise, what do we think is the right way to handle these kinds of incoming operational requests or opportunities?
I think that's a TAO voting proposal, right? It would have to be.
Yes.
I think we should just follow our governance process. Also, I'm not sure if everybody knows that the governance process is pinned to the forum. I saw that it was unpinned by somebody recently, but it's there. And I think the natural process for that would be submitting to advice process in the forum. And maybe we could promote a community call and really promote that, invite everybody to learn about osmotic funding, maybe even do a Twitter space or something that has like a large reach. And once it's there for a few days for advice process, then it can be submitted to TAO voting.
I feel like it's missing the step of getting the advice process of a smaller group first. Like, hey, what does this group of people think that are active in the TEC? Where could we use it? And like starting to shape an idea before it goes to the forum. I feel like that jumping to the forum jumps over that one step that we used to have.
Yeah, I had that actually in the original proposal. It was a footnote, but I think that might be something that we could look at for funding, maybe not the first proposal for this team, but maybe a second one down the road, because it's I guess what I would say is, why don't we put that into one of the issues that we're looking at in terms of like budgeting? Budgeting for like the ongoing costs of this team.
I think what would be nice is to have Sam or someone from One Hive and just have like a brainstorming session, because there are some upsides and some downsides to using food proposals as the main source of compensation for this team, but there may be hundreds of other use cases that we may want to incorporate moving forward. And then after that, if there's any advice process or whatever that leads up to the proposal, I think that's.
I mean, if it costs us nothing from the TEC's perspective, then yeah, I don't see why we wouldn't want to have an upgraded gardens that had more capabilities. I do think it's like a really good feature for common pool distribution in terms of setting up a grant type system. So I think that's really nice. But yeah, go ahead.
The interesting thing, like I was with Sam in Mexico and he was showing me osmotic funding in action. The one limitation that I told him was that there's no cap, right? It's not like you make a proposal and it's only for 100K and then it streams it. It's like right now the current implementation takes the total sum of the common pool and streams it. So there's no limit. There's no limit. It just keeps going and going and going until the requirements aren't met or the common pool's empty. So something to think about. It's like you can't quite like scope the mandate. It just keeps on streaming from whatever treasury it's in.
Oh, that's interesting to know. Yeah, and it's like this is the conversation that I mean, like we need a place for this conversation to happen before we throw things on the forum. That's the question I'm really asking. Thanks, Mitch, for that. That's interesting.
So we're over.
I do agree with. Sorry, yeah, I just wanted to say that I do agree with Tom. In this, whether it's something taken specifically by the Common Ops team or whether we do a sort of bridge where we kind of, yeah, but it doesn't make sense given that it's taken us so long to come forward with this proposal and we're a team of 10. Imagine if we try and scope it out from scratch in a wider community. It's going to be a nightmare. So there does need to be that process. But yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Okay, so we are over time, but I think we put that into the bin for right now, just something that we got to figure out, and we've got to build a bin for capturing things like that. So, okay, so let's wrap it up here. Thank you, everybody. Much appreciated. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
See ya.